Well, hey there, team. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Worth Your Time, Worth Your Money. Let's not beat around the bush. We've got a bit to cover. There's history here. It's important to understand the history and as to why this game's getting a reboot and almost why they don't understand what you're supposed to do in a reboot. So we're looking at Phantom Brigade 2.0, a game where, look, because I can lose the thread sometime, we'll front load what the game is, and then I will explain to you in depth why not only does this 2.0 not even close to address the problem with 1.0, but how this seems to be beyond this game. It's a studio-based problem that they have shown time and time again in previous releases, and I suspect while this is getting some popularity spike as people come back to go, oh, is it change? Because 2.0 is this new phenomena we see where a game recognizes that it shit the bed in the first instance and goes back to the drawing board to reimagine. That's not what they've done here. The fundamental reasons that you stop playing it at 1.0 are still here. All they've really added is overhauling things like loot systems and characters and putting more depth into them and camping systems in the world map. The core problem still exists. So much so I had to look up what had even changed in 2.0 as someone that, bounced off the first game because of it being the first game. So yeah, this isn't a 2.0 Phoenix Rising that you may have hoped for, that you'd seen in something like a Cyberpunk or a No Man's Sky where they go back to the drawing board and they just redo it fundamentally. No. What this 2.0 is a 1.5. It's still the core game with bells and whistles attached to the top. This seems harsh. I'm not trying to be harsh, but I'm trying to be honest. Okay, cool. What is Phantom Brigade? Let's get the core loop out of the way. This is a mixture of probably BattleTech as examples and Battlestar Galactica Deadlock, right? So conceptually, it is a strategic top-down game with mechs and pilots. On the meta layer, you have a wandering base that you manage. You swap out bits and pieces, arms, legs as directional damage, and then the pilots can take damage. But in the moment-to-moment, it is a turn-based strategy game where you manage a couple of mechs at a time and you maneuver them around in such a way that you lock in your turn, you execute your turn, and at the same time, the enemy executes their turn, and it all plays out in sort of real time, right? So like I said, a marrying of those two games. Battlestar Galactica Deadlock does the same idea where you just plot out your turns and execute, and BattleTech is more of a traditional turn-based, almost XCOM type version, right? So my turn, your turn, you do your moves, you're 95% to hit and you still miss, that sort of stuff. The gimmick that this brings to the table is that you have this in-universe, not really well explained, it was just a prototype tech before you were attacked, and you happen to have it and the enemy doesn't, where you can see what the enemy's move is going to be. So your turn will be a 5-second block into the future, and you can kind of slide left and right up along the predictive timeline to see what the enemy's going to do. Immediately, this may set off alarm bells in your head, red flags as it were, because both those examples I gave you, whether it's BattleTech or Deadlock, cool games. I like them a lot, but they do suffer from being necessarily tedious. And I don't even know if that's the best term, but I'm trying to use a term to explain the trapping of that genre that even a fan or a detractor will understand, right? In either of those games, you could end up in a battle that goes for an hour plus because you're just fidgeting around and fiddling with the minutia that is inherent to that thing. And you've got examples like XCOM 2, the King of the Castle for turn-based strategy type games, which in execution in moment to moment, fairly simple. You click, you move, you flank, but you pretty much, you've got a couple of abilities, but the actual tactical combat tries to keep it fairly clean and streamlined, whereas, your BattleTechs or your Deadlocks become a bit more fiddly and then in turn blow out. So what this game does is says, let's add an even more fiddly mechanic on top of those fiddly mechanics. And so yes, it blows out. In the beginning, it's only giving you a couple of dudes, and I've been playing it for a couple of hours already, and it gave me some random resistance fighters, and I was handling 4 mechs at once, and it becomes overwhelmingly fiddly, clicking to move your character along the timeline, but then, I don't want him to move that far, so I can't edit out a little bit of that movement. I have to delete the whole movement and replot that movement. There's a lot of that sort of trial and error, trying to line up dodging from an enemy's predictive fire or trying to get in range for a shot, but maybe you made a misstep, so now you got to delete that whole thing and replot it. And then you got to place down the attack on the timeline, but then you can move it, but the readability isn't really there. Like, if you look at this footage, I actually think the art style's wonderful. I mean, that's an aside, right? But the UI is actually really pretty. It's clean. It very much appeals to a part of my animal brain. But the UX, the actual interfacing with all of it, is just so frustrating, and it always was. And so we have a game built on a genre that is already fiddly by design, however, tolerable for those that enjoy the niche, which I do. But now we're going to make it more fiddly by adding another layer on top of it. And the managing of that, the UI elements, the moving around, targeting things and sliding it back and forth. And it doesn't even really give you great feedback of whether you're going to kill a dude or not. So you might just pour fire onto the dude and then you wait for that 5 seconds to play out. And if the guy's still standing, we'll just pour fire on. It's not like you can use the interesting time manipulation mechanic to really get some sort of finesse or power out of it. Like something like Super Hot comes to mind. Super Hot, where I know radically different, but it's one of those things where the time manipulation is part of the core loop. But you will line up a headshot and fire that gun at that dude, and you know that dude is going to die. And so you have triaged that, and you'll turn away and you'll start moving or engaging with another enemy, and it makes you feel cool as shit because you can triage the enemies and move on to the next one. In this, you can't really, right? In this, you have to just keep shooting them, pour all your fire onto the dudes, and then let the turn play out, and then hopefully he's dead. And at a certain point, the question will arise, and you will find yourself asking, why is this time mechanic on this? And wouldn't the game actually be better without it? If it was just a BattleTech clone where you just plugged in your turn, you looked at your percentage, and then you fired. And I don't have an answer for you, because the true answer is it would be. And so to go full circle back to the beginning of what I said about how Brace Yourself games, they seem to be pretty cool at getting an elevator pitch. If I tried to elevator pitch this to you and said, hey, what if you took BattleTech but you added this sci-fi time mechanic where you could predict their moves? Yeah, that sounds cool, but they shit the bed in executing on it. And it's worth pointing out their previous game, Industries of Titan. I really like that. I have a soft spot for it, but I know exactly why it flopped and why it's got negative reviews, because it similarly does not take your time seriously and respect it. And they have a tedious mechanic. The elevator pitch for that game is, what if you had like a city builder, but you could go inside the buildings and you could build out the little moving parts inside the building, like you have a micro and a macro industry. But it kind of gets abandoned fairly quickly. In the early game, it's working. You're going into a building and you're building out your industry. But once you go macro, it doesn't matter anymore. It just didn't work. And then you'd have shipbuilding and you have to build the internals of the ship. And are you seeing a theme here? They add these fiddly elevator pitch, cool on paper ideas to their game, but they just don't really execute on it very well. And, you know, this might be the harshest thing to say, but it makes me realize that Brace Yourself games, their big first hit, which was Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is widely regarded as an excellent game, and it is an excellent game, but in light of what I've just shown you, these two games that have two interesting gimmicks on paper that they just don't really execute on well, it makes you realize that they accidentally caught lightning in a bottle in the first instance on Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is a rhythm-based moving through a dungeon. It's really boppy and cool and tight, and it doesn't waste your time because it moves against a musical stave like it can't. So I'm convinced that either whoever really caught lightning in that first game is not with the studio anymore, or they just accidentally got it and they can't figure out why they caught it in the first instance. And truly, I hope you understand, these criticisms are with a heavy heart. I want this game to be not bad. I want it to be better. There's so much cool stuff in here. And in the instance of when they did release this and Industries of Titan, they gave me hope for the early access model. This studio was putting out trailers once a week or once a fortnight. It was alternating fortnights. That's what it was, or alternating weeks. But, you know, they would actually have channel pages of this is what this update's bringing to the table. And they made everyone else that did early access look stupid. They were so high production and engaged, and yet they have fallen away because they are still missing the fundamental of game design 101, is that your game has to be fun and it has to be executed on perfectly. And so all of this makes me really sad, but what makes me kind of angry is this 2.0 nonsense. I went digging because, like I said, I couldn't tell the difference. I was like, oh, great, this game is still kind of wasting my time, and that's the reason why I bounced off it in the first instance. And I feel like that's what everyone else did. That's why the game flopped. It had a peak and never came back, and the only people that this studio seems to have to talk to for feedback would be the hardcore sweats that play it every day, that probably sit in their Discord and talk to them nonstop. And we've talked about this with indie development. It's a real problem, to the point where you have the perfect examples of No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk having 2.0 releases because they fucked their game up. They went back to the drawing board. They rebuilt it. They actually figured out what they did wrong. And then they had a soft relaunch in a 2.0 addressing the fundamental problems that were design based and fixing, and they were heralded because of it. Phantom Brigade 2.0 has not changed a single thing about the fundamental loop that was broken in the first place. What it has done has catered to the everyday players that are in the Discord talking to the dev, hypothetically. And we've seen this before, where they've, added a character upgrade system. They've overhauled the loot system. They've added like camping and fatigue and all this jingly, dangly keys for the already invested players. So it's not a 2.0, it's a 1.5. It's lots of moving parts and cool little bits of tinsel on the tree, but the tree is dead, if I were to continue that analogy. And that makes me a little bit cross, because I'm here giving it a go because it says 2.0, because I assumed the devs had a come to Jesus moment and rebuilt it. But from my digging, have a looking at it, because I could swear there was a bit more story, there was voice acting, there were even little cinematics, and I went looking around and I found people saying the same thing. I'd have to go back to old B-roll from back in the day, but they've gutted out some of that stuff that I remember, and it kind of makes it have a little less personality and just more of a sandbox thing. And, the real cherry on the cake, if you've made it this far and you're still holding out for it, is because of the nature of this fiddly mechanic being, presumably complex to save state, there is no mid-mission save state. So again, try playing BattleTech or Battlestar Galactica Deadlock without the ability to save half an hour into an hour engagement. That would be just like a no-brainer. They have those save states. They need those save states because they're fiddly. So they took the fiddly genre. They added more fiddly stuff on top of it, and they still haven't got a save state ability. Now, I'm not trying to say it would be easy. It's probably incredibly difficult to figure that out with this gimmick mechanic, but the answer just keeps pointing back to the same problem. Your gimmick, your party trick, your elevator pitch for why Phantom Brigade exists and what differentiates it from the opposition is not a value add. It is a detractor in almost every way. And because I suppose it's the soul of what is your game, you decided not to address any of that in your 2.0 rebuild. So dear developers, if you've heard me and made it this far, while I'm getting impassioned and I'm disappointed, I am not angry or vitriolic or hateful. That is not my pace. Not at all. But I feel like you're listening to the wrong people, to the point where you have a 2.0 release, which is not a 2.0 release. It's a free DLC. It's upgraded mechanics and cosmetics added onto a game that flopped at release, and tragically, it's probably going to flop after this 2.0 when people realize that you haven't fixed the thing that pushed them away in the first instance. If somehow you're still in high spirits and you've actually taken my message legitimately, find my business email and email me. I will, free of charge, talk to you about this, because whether it's your bubble or the fandom or whoever you've surrounded yourself in, they're not telling you what you need to hear. And they didn't, and that's why the previous game flopped, and this one's probably going to do the same thing. And if your studio survives this, I worry for the next release having the same inbuilt problems at the ground level. Anyway, team, it hurts my heart saying these things, especially for a studio I love and a game that I really like the idea of, but something's wrong in the wheelhouse. And it's pretty apparent that they're not going to fix it. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.